Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Riakahara Wash Process Kenya from Koppi Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Koppi, based out of Helsingborg, Sweden, and this coffee was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video as part of the Battle of the Tomato, where it finished 4th place out of 5 wash processed Kenyans on that day. I think a lot of the reason for wanting to review this coffee was because of our last experience with Koppi, which was an extremely positive experience. They were featured in our Cafe Box Advent Calendar series, and it was their Ethiopian that was one of my favorite coffees from that entire Advent Calendar. So I definitely wanted to review them again, and I'd never tried one of their Kenyan coffees, and I really enjoy reviewing Kenyan coffees. So this felt like the perfect opportunity to do so. Looking forward to discussing this coffee, as this right here is day 23. And Koppi does have somewhat of a brew guide on their website, which is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio. And I settled on 93 degrees Celsius. We'll get into why that was a little later. My preferred brew method for this coffee was the V60, which would indicate a more medium fine grind. Koppi notoriously is a Nordic light for their roast profile. However, this one felt a little bit more developed than any of the previous Koppi coffees I'd had. So keep that in mind for this roast profile. Those things out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and the coffee definitely didn't have that same sort of subtlety that a lot of their previous coffees have had, as this one right here definitely came out a lot more robust, way more so than I was necessarily expecting. So my previous experience with almost every one of Koppi's coffees have been that they're very tame and delicate, whereas this one definitely came out a lot more robust, as there was plenty of that Kenyan-like savoriness right off the bat. But in addition to that, it felt somewhat more developed than I was initially expecting, which is something I kind of alluded to. So it didn't necessarily leave the best first impression. We continue as day 15, ran it through the V60 and noted that once again, as it just felt a little bit more developed than I think I was expecting from this cup of coffee. There's a lot of robust Kenyan savoriness to the cup in general, and that's going to be a consistent theme throughout this review, as this coffee was extremely consistent. There was a slight bit of sweet cherry, but for the most part, this cup of coffee continued to be dominated by a more savory base. Day 17, the strong components continue to dominate the cup, as I was getting 3 really distinct and strong components, which included that aforementioned savory. But in addition to that, there was a fair bit of herbality to it, and smokiness was a really dominant factor in this cup of coffee, especially at the higher temperatures. So those 3 things were in significantly more abundance than the sweeter cherry, which is what I was really looking for and trying to get more from this cup of coffee. But for the most part, didn't have too much to add on this day either, as these notes are going to continue to remain, for the most part, pretty similar. As day 18, adjustments were still not yielding many changes to the overall results, as regardless of the recipe or brew method I had, everything remained for the most part pretty similar. High on the savoriness, high on the smokiness, while the cherry sweetness is felt but in significantly lower margin. Day 20, struggling to find any significant differentiating factors to this cup of coffee, as it yields classic Kenyan-like savory characteristics with a heavy bit of smokiness. Again, consistent. Plenty of full body aspects to this cup as well. So that's one of the big selling points to people on Kenyan coffees, is that they can have a more robust, as they like to describe, juicy body to them. Whereas for me, body isn't necessarily one of the more important factors. So that's never going to be a huge selling point to me. So maybe a little bit more body, not really anything I really care about too much. Day 21, attempted higher temperatures, and the cup continues to feel very robust in the smokiness. So obviously that's what I was going to be getting, was the higher the temperatures were, the more smokiness I was getting. That's why I settled on what's probably considered a lower temperature at 93 Celsius. So yeah, definitely feeling a lot more of the savoriness and smokiness with those higher temperatures. And as a result, day 21 didn't necessarily give me a better cup, as it was very Kenyan-like, slight bit of that cherry to the cup, and even more of the herbality, the smokiness, and the savoriness. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, 4 level 4s, let's run through those real quick. Finish, yeah, I mean, Kenyans for the most part have a really long lasting finish. I can't recall the last time I might have scored a Kenyan lower than level 4, so it's definitely justified there in that spot. Savoriness, Level 4. So I've been harping on how dominant the savory aspect of this coffee is, but again, keeping in mind that in that blind taste test, the dock really dominated and blew the savoriness away, even compared to this coffee. That's the type of coffee that would justify level 5. This one right here, while savoriness is the most dominant aspect to this coffee, it still only kind of reaches that level 4 mark. That being said, it's very much the most dominant factor in this coffee. And the smokiness at a level 4, so I think the day I brewed this coffee, the smokiness was pretty high, as I kind of mentioned, even slightly higher temperatures, 95 degrees Celsius, 205 degrees Fahrenheit. I was getting so much smokiness from this coffee, so I think it's justified there at the level 4. And the acidity, yeah, Kenyans tend to be a little on the acidic side sometimes, and this one was no different in that aspect, so that one definitely at a level 4. And I was being generous on these 2 marks. The sweetness at a level 3, it could be on the lower side of the level 3, higher side of the level 2, and it could go either way. As mentioned, I was kind of being a little generous with that, as well as the cleanliness, because the savoriness and the smokiness were really high in this coffee. So I could definitely bump that down to a level 2, higher side of the level 2, lower side of the level 3, but being a little generous on this tasting wheel. Body, level 3, yeah, classic Kenyan body, kind of middle ground for the most part. Florality, mentioned that there was a fair bit of herbality to it. I would probably be more inclined to list something like a hibiscus for this cup of coffee because it did have that red herbality to it. Flavor notes they have listed on here are cherry, which, yeah, I get. Juicy, which, yeah, it's a Kenyan. And then passion fruit, which at no point I would ever say I was experiencing any sort of passion fruit-like component to this cup of coffee. But then the cherry, or berry fruit at level 3, which of course would indicate that cherry, yeah, even though it's very distant from the other stronger aspects in this cup of coffee, I still feel like it's pronounced and felt enough to justify a level 3 mark. But for the most part, nothing else worth discussing in the tasting wheel. I think it looks pretty good from what I was experiencing from this cup of coffee. Alright, my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, it wasn't what I was expecting at all going into it. And I think I was expecting a coffee that was maybe somewhat similar to that dock coffee, which was very, even more savory forward, but in a more delicate and tame manner, given my previous experiences with Koppi's coffees. And maybe as a result, this was actually a little better than I might have been expecting, given that it felt they might have pushed this one a little further than they typically do with a lot of their coffees, and that might have toned down what could have potentially been an overbearing savoriness to this cup of coffee. Even then, I think it's kind of well established at this point that traditional, straightforward Kenyans are never going to necessarily be my favorite coffees in general, as I tend to prefer sweetness and clarity to these coffees, and this one didn't necessarily have either of those two, so it's not going to be my favorite Kenyan. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, though, it feels like a great fit for people that love their classic Kenyans, as in fact, I know somebody that's drinking this coffee right now, and he's a pretty big fan of it, given that he's a huge Kenyan fan, and it does have those very standard traditional Kenyan characteristics. And if you can go drinking an entire bag of this cup of coffee, then it's a good fit for you. I tend to get kind of bored by these coffees up to the second or third cup, and that's why I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of these in general. But with that being said, I know people love these coffees, and so that's just kind of the best way I can direct that, and the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you enjoyed the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Riakahara Wash Process Kenya from Koppi Coffee. Thank you for watching.